Welcome back, everyone. Jake here. Currently, we're on day 35 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and of course, Russia can no longer win this war. All they can do is kill more people and destroy more buildings, but that's not winning. And potentially, Russia is starting to realize this as they publicly announced that they're going to be pulling troops back from the area around Kyiv. This is the capital city, and originally, they thought they needed to take this town. However, they've struggled basically everywhere, and they still haven't taken the city of Mariupol, so they know that trying to also take Kyiv at this time just isn't realistic. Plainly put, guys, they did not bring a large enough invasion force to conquer a country of over 40 million people actively resisting. These are the estimates that Ukraine has put out of Russian casualties. And this is 17,300 dead. This doesn't count wounded in action. It doesn't count missing in action. And perhaps you could say this estimate is high, but I have to imagine with Russia's disastrous invasion strategy, they're still losing. Russian soldiers dying. They're still losing a couple hundred soldiers a day. And I think Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin is starting to freak out about this number because the number of 15,000 dead is significant to the Kremlin because that's how many Soviet soldiers they lost in their disastrous invasion of Afghanistan. If you're not familiar with the history, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Eve, 1979. They then stayed there for almost 10 years fighting, and over 10 years they lost 15,000 troops. So potentially in 35 days, the Kremlin has lost more Russian soldiers than the Soviet Union lost over 10 years fighting in Afghanistan. Fun piece of history: why did the Soviet Union invade Afghanistan? And actually their true objective was to invade Pakistan. For the longest time, the Soviet Union was always very insecure about their navy. For their Black Sea fleet to get out into the Atlantic Ocean, it had to go through NATO-controlled waters. Same thing with the Baltic Sea coming out of St. Petersburg. They would have to sail through, once again, NATO water to get out. So the objective, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, was actually to invade Pakistan in order to have warm water ports in the Indian Ocean. This is partly why in 1972 Pakistan started their own nuclear program, because they knew that once the Soviet Union subdued Afghanistan, Pakistan was going to be next. And potentially with the strategic withdrawal of Russian forces north of Kyiv, this shaded red area, these soldiers will pull back into Belarus. The forces north of Chernobyl will also fall back into Belarus or potentially Russia. More than likely, Russia is just going to take these forces and swing them around and have them help with the assault on Kharkiv or potentially just holding this southern land bridge. I do want to point out that this shaded red area that Russia took is actually the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and nobody lives there. It's pretty easy to take and occupy a territory in which no people live because it's hazardous to live there. And Russia is so stupid, they actually sent their soldiers through the Chernobyl Red Forest, where nobody is supposed to go. And their trucks and their tanks kicked up a bunch of radioactive dust. None of their soldiers are wearing protective gear. So the fact that Russia wants to strategically withdraw from a radioactive forest that is killing their own troops, that's actually pretty smart. But do the Ukrainians really want to take back the Chernobyl plant? As long as, I guess, Russia guarantees that they won't attack it or bomb it, I think the Ukrainians probably would be willing to retake control of the facility, once again to make sure that no radioactive hazardous material spills out across Europe. And this withdrawal is the first admission from Russia that they're losing on the ground. Their ground forces are performing terribly. And prior to the announcement of this withdrawal, They basically already lost the city of Irpin, which is outside of Kyiv. Additionally, Ukrainian forces are counterattacking, and they cut off Russian supplies outside of Kharkiv. So you see this green circle, this green wedge. Ukrainian ground forces are successfully advancing, cutting off Russian troops. Additionally, Kherson, which is a city in the south, the only major city that the Russians successfully took in the first couple days, Ukrainian forces are now contesting this city again. They're basically going back in, and fighting now is occurring. So nowhere on the map really is it safe for Russian forces on the ground, as Ukrainian counterinsurgents are forming these small groups and basically going out every day hunting. They're just looking for Russian soldiers on the ground that they can ambush and take out. And how are the Russian ground forces doing as far as numbers? And there are so many people wanting to volunteer and join the Ukrainian military that the military is actually turning people away. Over 140,000 Ukrainians living abroad returned to the country in order to fight Russia. And the Ukrainian military actually doesn't have the capacity at this time to take them in. They're already full up. So a lot of Ukrainians, this article is about a journalist who returned home to volunteer to fight, but Ukrainians are upset that they're being turned away at recruitment stations. Some have even been basically bribing the military in order to get in. And this is great news for the Ukrainian military, as they're not just taking any random people. They're looking specifically for people with skills, either prior military experience, combat experience, medical experience. They're looking for the most qualified and capable people, so they're not just taking basically teenagers off the street and then throwing them into battle, which is in effect what Russia is doing with their conscripts. So what I've read about Ukrainians' military is they're giving everyone a 7-day basic training field course to get them ready for combat, how to operate a weapon, how to do a tourniquet, and then they're mobilizing them. So every week, every 7 days, just imagine that tens of thousands of more Ukrainians have graduated from their 1-week training course, and they'll be put to use on the battlefield. Additionally, there are lots of specialists, not just American, but from all over Europe, veterans who are coming into Ukraine and then giving training basically in the western parts, where it's safe to give classes and teach operations. So there's lots of expertise flowing into the country to get Ukrainian forces sped up and make them the most combat capable possible. Meanwhile, how are the Russian forces doing? And here's a picture taken by a Ukrainian civilian of Russian forces stealing sacks of potatoes. Because their troops are not properly being fed, they're being forced to go into cities and they're robbing grocery stores. So here are the sacks of potatoes that these Russian soldiers are collecting because they don't have enough food. Additionally, guys, there's just very bizarre vehicles as Russia is struggling with their tanks, struggling with their trucks. They keep breaking down. So more and more civilian vehicles are being seen in the country. Let me just show you this clip real quick. What the heck is that? That is a Mitsubishi pickup truck with some kind of gun welded on the back. And this is what Russia is now sending their soldiers into war with. One Kalashnikov will take out this vehicle and kill everyone inside. There's absolutely no armor protection protecting the occupants of this vehicle. But in a way, I think Russian soldiers prefer the reliability of a civilian truck over their own military equipment. It's just very bizarre. There's also a story that a Russian soldier allegedly surrendered his tank for $10,000 cash and guaranteed Ukrainian citizenship. Apparently, the Ukrainian government has figured out how to hack the phones of Russians with Russian SIM cards inside the country, and they're texting them all directions how to surrender, with the promise of a cash reward and Ukrainian citizenship if they surrender. So hopefully more Russian soldiers can get their hands on phones and take up this offer. Here's a video I want to share with you guys of a Ukrainian soldier thanking the British for sending them anti-tank weapons.
This one was shot from this beautiful thing. And I want to say a big thank to our British comrades that are helping us.
Wow, look at what that anti-tank weapon did to that Russian tank. And there's about 1,000 of these anti-tank missiles flowing into Ukraine every single day. So if I was a Russian conscript being forced to drive around one of these things, I would be willing to surrender as well. Now, you might notice on top of this tank, there's this goofy slat thing welded on. And these are apparently called cope cages. And Russia, to counter anti-tank weapons, are telling their soldiers to weld on these slats. The way these Javelin missiles work is they actually fly up and then come down and try and strike the tank from the top where the armor is the weakest. However, these cages don't work. They don't actually provide any protection. These tanks are still going to be taken out, but I think Russian leadership is telling their forces to put these on, giving them the illusion that this will somehow help or protect them. Additionally, there's just very bizarre Russian propaganda being put out that, in my opinion, is very lazy and stupid. One of them is of this Chechen warlord who has been very vocal on social media, saying that he stands with Putin, he stands with the Russian forces fighting in Ukraine. Initially, he said that he was outside of Kyiv. This was like a month ago, laying siege to the city with the Russian soldiers, but he was then seen publicly in Chechnya. He's now saying that he's fighting in Mariupol. He's got his gun sitting next to him. The problem with this picture, guys, is he's praying at this gas station. I guess it's called Rosneft. And Rosneft doesn't operate in Ukraine. So this idiot is obviously still in Russia somewhere, saying that he's, helping the troops fight in Mariupol, which he isn't. Next video I want to show you, once again, is Russia's attempt to counter all of the pro-Ukrainian war stories and TikToks and videos being put out. So Russia produced this very bizarre, goofy clip. So Russia wanted to make a video having Russian soldiers looking badass, assaulting an enemy position. The problem is this building is completely empty, guys. There is nobody firing back. If you think there actually were Ukrainian forces in this building, why would the cameraman be completely exposed filming this? And apparently at the beginning of the video, you can also hear in Russian someone yell, come on, let's start, I'm shooting." So these Russian soldiers are making a video of them heroically fighting, and they're just firing on an empty building they've already destroyed. The next video I want to share with you guys is of Russian drones that have been captured during this war. They've been taking them apart and learning how they're built, and it's not good news for Russia.
Russians also appear to have been extensively using their surveillance drones. But what's really interesting is what Ukrainians found when analyzing downed Russian drones. Upon inspection of downed Russian drones such as Orlan, Aileron, Forepost, and Granat, it turned out that only airframes and parachutes were made in Russia. All the internal electronics were foreign-made civilian-grade products. One engine was made in Japan by Saito Seisakusho, a starter generator made in the US by Texas Instruments Inc., telemetry controller made in the US by Microchip, flight controller made by European SC Microelectronics, while the GPS tracker was made in China. Aileron's photographic equipment is actually made from Sony and Olympus point-and-shoot cameras. Not a single Russian-made drone captured in Syria and Ukraine had any Russian-made electronics. The biggest weakness of Russian military-industrial complex is its inability to master the production of modern microelectronics, be it chips or other sensors. For example, even components for the Bulava missile rely on imported American
So what this is telling us is that Russia's military is entirely dependent on American, European, Japanese electronics and chips in order to operate. With all of these sanctions going on Russia, they're not going to be able to get more parts. They're not going to be able to make more when everything they have in their modern arsenal is dependent on foreign chips. All they make in Russia is the frame and the parachutes. And honestly, I wouldn't really trust the parachute if it was Russian made. How is Ukrainian morale? How are the Ukrainians doing? Obviously, for Russia to win this war, they have to completely destroy the Ukrainian will to fight. So it's always encouraging seeing these uplifting clips, these uplifting stories of what everyday life for Ukrainians is now like. So here are some Ukrainian soldiers doing a live performance in Kyiv for civilians, showing off their pretty good music skills. Here's the next clip I want to share with you of Kharkiv's symphony orchestra putting on a free music show in the subway system, which is now used as a bomb shelter for civilians.
Мероприятие — это такой лучик света, который позволяет действительно верить в лучшее и надеяться, что все-таки действительно скоро все закончится, все.
I just can't fathom or imagine how difficult life is for these civilians who have to live underground now to protect themselves from Russian bombs and Russian artillery. But as long as the Ukrainian will to fight is there, I think the civilians will continue to support them and support their goal of being free from Russian rule. The last story that is very alarming to me that I want to share with you guys is that Russia is stealing civilians from Ukraine. They've already had this dispute where they say they'll allow humanitarian corridors, but only into Russia. But obviously, Ukrainians don't want to go to Russia when Russia is the one killing all of their people. And Ukraine is saying that Russia is basically taking hostages back to Moscow, potentially important or significant people or the loved ones of important and significant people. And Russia is saying that, yeah, these 400,000 people, we took them, but they wanted to go to Russia. This was their choice. And for those who have been taken to Russia and been able to get their story out, I'll link this article down below if you want to read it, but they're not going there voluntarily and they're not being treated well. If everyday Russians can't even use the word war or be critical of Putin's special military operation, what do you think these civilians are allowed to say when they know the war crimes and atrocities that Russian soldiers are committing? So what's happening to a lot of these Ukrainian civilians being kidnapped and forced to go to Russia is they're being basically put in concentration camps. And I actually now believe that this was one of the objectives of Russia when they decided to invade Ukraine. They wanted to steal their people, basically harvest their people to bring back worker camps. And Russia has these already to a certain extent. You know, if you offend Vladimir Putin, you go to prison for 15 years. But one of the staples of the old Soviet Union was their gulag system. And this is just slavery, forcing people to do manual labor for the benefit of the country, being held against their will, potentially for life. And a lot of these Ukrainians being forced into Russia are being forced into jobs they don't want to do, or potentially they're being held as sex slaves or child sex slaves, domestic servants. And I think this was an objective of Russia going in. They wanted to harvest their people who potentially already speak Russian, are ethnically similar, culturally similar, bring them back to Russia to supplement their own aging and declining population base. This makes a lot of sense to obviously the detriment of Ukraine, but I think there was a serious insecurity about population demographics in Russia, and they're deliberately stealing people in order to prop up their own declining society. Ultimately, that's what this war is about. Vladimir Putin is a former Soviet KGB intelligence officer who objected to the dissolution of the former Soviet Union, and he wants to once again extend Moscow's glory, extend Russia's glory. And I'm sure that invading Ukraine was just step one, as the Russian military would use the threat of nuclear weapons to invade more of their neighbors. Thankfully, it's not turning out the way he wanted, and hopefully he won't stay in power much longer. Okay guys, if you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Really helps out with the algorithm. If you have any comments or questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, be safe, take care.